It was the summer of 1984 in the Dulais Valley in South Wales, and coal miners there and across Britain were on strike. This was no strike over better pay or working conditions, but about the survival of mining communities themselves. Remote areas like the Dulais Valley had nothing but coal. They were too far away in both distance and culture for miners to find other jobs. If they lost and the mines closed, the villages where their families had lived for generations would be left for dead. This was so important that the miners were striking without pay. The strike had been going on for months and seemed like it would last a while longer. One day, the phone rang in the village hall. It was a group called LGSM. They had raised money for the miners and their families. Would someone from Dulais come to London to meet them and pick up the money? A miner named Di Donovan drove to London, and only when he got there did he realize that LGSM stood for Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. Now remember, this was 1984. Homosexuality was still classified as a mental illness and would be until 1991. And with the AIDS epidemic well underway, no test for the disease and no treatment, paranoia towards gay men in particular was running high. I don't know how many of you have been to South Wales. I have, and the word insular barely begins to describe Welsh culture. It is not friendly to outsiders, and its tradition of evangelical Methodism is socially conservative. The Welsh miners had no experience of openly LGBTQ people. Members of LGSM visited the Dulais Valley not knowing how they would be treated. One of them, Mike Jackson, remembers, "The only thing they knew about us was that we were queer and we supported them." Some of the villagers were hostile and walked out. Most of the others were embarrassed that gays and lesbians, of all people, were the ones helping them. But slowly they got over it and came to accept LGSM's help, not only the money LGSM raised, but their advice as well. The miners' picket lines were being harassed by police. Gay and lesbian people in the early 1980s had long experience of police harassment, and they'd had to learn exactly where police powers ended and civil rights began. LGSM taught the miners to demand that the police respect their civil rights. As Di Donovan says in the film Pride, which dramatizes the story, "What you've given us is more than money. It's friendship. When you're in a battle against an enemy so much bigger, so much stronger than you, to find out you had a friend you never knew existed, well, that's the best feeling in the world." The parable of the Good Samaritan is one of the most beloved of the stories of Jesus. It's not only a beloved Christian story, it's familiar in secular culture too. Hospitals and crisis hotlines all over the world are named for the Good Samaritan. People who've never set foot in a church in their lives know that character and what it represents. We're drawn to the figure of the Good Samaritan. We identify with him. We try to emulate him, the man who showed mercy to a stranger. Nobody wants to identify with the man beaten by robbers and left for dead at the side of the road. But that's who Jesus' original Jewish audience would have related to, the unfortunate Jewish traveler. And this familiar, beloved parable takes on a new depth and meaning when we read it from his point of view. The road between Jerusalem and Jericho is a completely realistic setting for a first-century robbery. These two cities are 17 miles apart. Jerusalem sits up on a hill at 3,800 feet above sea level. Jericho is the lowest city on earth. It's 850 feet below sea level. That 17-mile road has an altitude change of 4,650 feet. The route in Jesus' day ran through the Wadi Kelt. It's a twisty, winding, dangerous road along a limestone canyon lined with caves. It's possible to walk from Jerusalem to Jericho in one day if you start early in the morning and nothing happens along the way. You do not want to spend the night on that road because the caves and twists in the road are perfect hideouts for robbers. And there were robbers there. The people who first heard Jesus tell this parable might well have known someone who'd been beaten and robbed on the Jericho road. That's probably why the first two passersby crossed the road and kept on going. To the priest and the Levite, this looked like a trap. That was probably a robber pretending to be hurt while the rest of his gang was lurking in a cave, waiting to jump anyone who stopped. Better to stay at a distance and move on, lest the priest and the Levite get beaten up too. They were afraid, so they kept on walking. For the man left for dead, it must have been devastating to hear their footsteps recede, one after the other. 2 chances for help gone. How long was he going to lie here? He would die without water and medical care. Would no one stop to help him? Imagine his relief when a third set of footsteps came near. And this time, thank God, the traveler stopped. But this time, it wasn't a fellow Jew. It was a Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews were cousins locked in a family feud that had been going on for centuries. Both were descended from the patriarch Jacob. Both worshiped the one God. Both followed the law God had given God's people in the Torah. But Jews worshiped at the temple in Jerusalem, while Samaritans worshiped at the temple on Mount Gerizim. Each group regarded the other as apostates who had fallen away from the true faith. Jews and Samaritans did not live in the same villages. They did not eat together. They did not interact at all if they could help it. But this is who stopped to help the man beaten by robbers. Not one of his own kind, but a Samaritan, whom Jews mistrusted and despised. The man beaten by robbers must have been shocked and more than a little horrified. Shocked that a Samaritan would help a Jew, and horrified that he, a faithful Jew, was going to have to accept help from a person he hated. He was going to have to let his enemy love him. Worse yet, he was going to owe a debt of honor to a Samaritan. In the first century, and still today in the Middle East, when someone does a favor for you, you have to reciprocate in some way. Who knew where that was going to lead, owing a favor to a Samaritan? Maybe there was a moment when the man beaten by robbers heard the Samaritan's accent, saw his clothes, and considered telling him to go away. Maybe he cursed God's sense of humor. But he didn't have much of a choice. Hang on to his prejudice and die, or accept care from a person he hated. The man beaten by robbers chose to let the Samaritan love him. How that choice, that acceptance of love and care from an enemy, must have changed this man after he recovered. Do you think he would ever look at Samaritans with scorn again? He owed his life to one of them. He could never again listen to prejudiced comments about Samaritans or curses on Samaritan villages without speaking up. Hey, they aren't what you think. One of them saved my life once when a couple of Jews wouldn't help me. Not only this one man, but his family and friends too are going to speak up in defense of Samaritans. This man's entire worldview has changed. So has that of the people around him. Maybe he repays that debt of honor with his own acts of mercy. Visiting a Samaritan village instead of avoiding it, greeting Samaritans he passes on the road, helping a Samaritan in trouble. By letting himself be loved, he finds that his love of neighbor has grown. His concept of neighbor now includes those he once thought were his enemies, and he grows to love them as much as he loves his own people. The British coal miners' strike lasted a full year until the union finally conceded. LGSM continued raising money for the Dulais Valley miners, helping provide food and heat through the winter. Although the miners lost the battle to save their communities, they remembered the friends who had supported them when they needed it the most. Those miners who had no experience of openly LGBTQ people in 1984 marched at the front of the Gay Pride Parade in London in 1985. Imagine that, coal miners at the front of the Gay Pride Parade. That year, the Labour Party voted to add gay rights to its party manifesto, years before other major parties in the UK or other countries put LGBTQ rights in their platforms. Gay rights had been proposed at Labour Party conferences before then, but had been rejected. It passed this time because of a bloc yes vote from the National Union of Mine Workers. The coal miners of the Dulais Valley accepted love from strangers they mistrusted and feared, and they let that love change them. Go and do likewise.